Special thanks to Horizon Therapeutics for sponsoring the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast, working tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics' mission at horizontherapeutics.com.
Jimi Hendrix might have been popped up on the playlist or something, and I'm like, oh yeah, the Jimi Hendrix experience. Maybe I should call it the dad joke experience. and I kind of thought about it, and I'm like, yeah, you know what? This is kind of sticking with me, the dad joke experience, because things get so heavy that sometimes you just gotta laugh a little bit. And I said, well, I don't know, let's try it. And for better or for worse, it's stuck.
That's our guest this week, Joel Liestman, a father, an actor, and an outspoken advocate for those with intellectual disabilities. We'll hear Joel's life story and how he and his wife Jennifer have raised their son Bennett, 11, who has Williams syndrome. That's all on this week's Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. Say hello now to our host, David Hirsch.
Hi, and thanks for listening to the Dad to Dad podcast, Fathers Mentoring Fathers of Children with Special Needs, presented by the Special Fathers Network.
The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children connect with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for dads to support dads. To find out more, go to 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we'd be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad.
So now let's tune in to this conversation between David Hirsch and Joel Liestman.
I'm thrilled to be talking today with Joe Liestman of Maple Grove, Minnesota, who has been a professional actor for more than 25 years, a father of a son with Williams syndrome, and an outspoken advocate for those with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Joel, thank you for taking the time to do a podcast interview for the Special Fathers Network.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You and your wife Jennifer have been married for 23 years and are the proud parents of Bennett, 11, who has Williams syndrome, a genetic condition present at birth and is characterized by medical problems, including cardiovascular disease, developmental delays, and learning challenges. Let's start with some background. Where did you grow up? Tell me something about your family.
Yeah, I grew up in the suburbs of Minneapolis in a city called Maple Grove. I have an older brother, and my mom and dad, great parents, got divorced when I was about 13, but worked very hard to make sure that my brother and I were always taken care of. In terms of a divorce, my parents certainly never pitted us in the middle of any issues that they had. I think they did a really tremendous job. Grew up here in the burbs, very quote-unquote normal suburban life, and then late in high school, I played soccer pretty much my whole life growing up. Everything that I did kind of revolved around that. But then in high school, I auditioned for a play because I had a crush on a girl, and she was in the play, and kind of caught the theater bug there after that, and sort of said, this is really fun, but it's also really interesting, and I'm really curious, and I want to know more about it, and kind of dived in, maybe with a touch of OCD of like, I need to know everything there is to know about theater and acting and performing and this business, and so really my life kind of took a turn at that point in terms of what I was really interested in and what I thought I would be doing in my life. Went to school at what is now called the University of Minnesota at Moorhead, which is right up on the Minnesota-North Dakota border, where if you're not careful, the wind will just flat out knock you down. and then after that, just kind of started working, did some regional theater, and then moved out to New York. Lived out there for years, and then we moved back when my wife and I were dating this whole time. We dated for many years, and we got married when we were out in New York, and she got a job opportunity to come back to the Twin Cities, and we said, well, sure, it's too good of an opportunity for her to pass up, and I figured I can be an unemployed actor in any city, so I'm like, yeah, let's do it. And It was ended up being a terrific move, not only for our family being back closer to our family and our extended family, but it has been great for my wife's career. It turned out to be really great for my career too. It took a little while to kind of break in, but once I broke into the theater community, I've worked pretty regularly around the Twin Cities and around the region. It's been really great. And then we decided to start a family.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, I want to go back a little bit and talk about your dad and some father influencers. So I'm sort of curious to know, what is it that your dad did for a living?
For the most part, my dad was a grocer. He managed a grocery store in the neighboring little town of Osseo. And it was just a small little independent grocery store that his longtime friend Dean opened, and it's called Dean's. It's still to this day called Dean's. And my dad, he was the guy that everybody in town knew because he worked at the market and everyone came into the market. And, my first job was working at Dean's. My brother's first job was working at Dean's. It just was a great little supermarket. And then at one point, probably about 11, 12 or so, my dad left Dean's and I think was just trying to find what the next thing was going to be. I'm not entirely sure, being good Midwesterners and Scandinavian and German people, they don't really talk about it, talk about what the circumstances that surrounded why he decided to try other fields. But for a while, had many different jobs and ended up back in the grocery business and worked in grocery for many years and then eventually moved over and was managing a liquor store. Obviously it was a different time. It was a time where you went to work, you came home, and that was pretty much it. And we had a pretty decent middle class upbringing.
So that's fabulous. I'm wondering, how would you characterize your relationship with your dad?
Obviously, I love my father, and he loves me, and that is something that neither of us ever doubt. But we are two very different personalities. We have very contentious moments, and we've had long stretches of time where we don't talk. Especially when I was younger, when I was, an angry young man in my 20s, we went long stretches where we didn't talk. It was everything from political differences at the time to finances to and anything. I think it was just anything that we could find to argue about, we would find. Like, I never doubted that he loved me and would always do whatever he needed to do to take care of me. When my folks got divorced, they made the decision that my brother and I should live primarily with my dad, since we were both early teenagers at that point, and my parents thought that might be the best situation. So there was a lot of male testosterone going on in the house, and led to some classic arguments. We get along well now, but we talk about these arguments as if they were these little epic asterisks in our timeline. Yeah, our relationship is I think at this point it's based on, I think he sees how I'm willing to do whatever I need to be doing for my kid just the same way he did. It's just we have different interests, and so how we are making that happen. But I like to think that he sees that same work ethic, that same dedication. I will say about my dad is he was never afraid to be an affectionate father and let me know that I was loved. He wasn't a stoic, quiet man who never said anything. He always made sure I knew that he loved me and that he was either proud of me or that he was frustrated with me. So I think that is something that I've taken directly from him in my parenting.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. If I can paraphrase what you said, he was present, and after the divorce, you and your brother lived with your dad, which maybe led to some confrontation, but in a healthy way, not an unhealthy way, and that Some of the things that you've taken away are his work ethic, his dedication to his family, and his willingness to show affection, perhaps like you show affection to Ben. And those are really important attributes when you look back and say, what is it that I'm trying to emulate that my dad did, whether it was conscious or unconscious. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
You mentioned you went to the University of Minnesota at Moorhead, and you took a bachelor's degree in theater. And I'm wondering, where did your career take you from there?
Once I graduated from college, my wife was also a theater major. We went to college together. We were a couple at the time. And then we just kind of started auditioning around. I got on a dinner theater circuit around the Midwest, just kind of going from one dinner theater to the next. And then we decided, you know what, we're young, we're dumb, let's move to New York. We have, $500 and a dream. Let's just up and move to New York and see what happens. And that was our early 20s, and that was our mid 20s, and that was the best time. We had a great time. We did a lot of growing up. We found out a lot about who we are as individuals. We got married when we were out there. Some of my closest friends to this day are people that I met in those little over 5 years living in New York. I do sort of feel like had we stayed in New York, I would have been really curious to see what that next year or 2 years would have been and where my career would have gone, because I sort of feel like I was starting to get it and really kind of starting to open some doors. But like I said before, my wife's job opportunity to come back to the Twin Cities was too good. There was just no way we were gonna pass that up.
So what is Bennett's diagnosis, and how did it come about?
Bennett was born 2 months premature for no reason. My wife and I literally went to her 32-week checkup. They said, great, everything's looking great. We'll see you back here in a couple weeks. And the next morning, her water broke. And it was a traumatic birth experience, an emergency C-section. There's a whole story with McDonald's French fries that I won't get into, but it was a wild birth experience. And we happened to have a nurse that was in the emergency room when my son was born, and just sort of said, the shape of his brow seems a little flat. His upper palate seemed a little high. Essentially, they came to me and said, we're wondering if we could run a few tests, because we are curious as to try to find out why your son was born 2 months early for, when there was no reason. You literally were just here yesterday. So I said, sure. And then they came back and said, we'd like to run some more genetic tests. And at that point, my wife and I sort of were like, well, you don't ask to run these extra genetic tests if you don't think you're going to find something. So we sort of started preparing ourselves, and then we got the phone call saying the geneticist would like to meet with you, and told us he had a diagnosis of Williams syndrome, which of course we had never heard of. At the time, Williams syndrome was about one in every 17,000 or so. I think the numbers have gotten a little tighter there as diagnosing Williams syndrome has gotten a little more efficient and better, but it's still considered a very rare disease. It's about one in every 10,000 births. And then it became, okay, what do we need to do to get him home from the hospital? What needs to happen? And obviously, having been born 2 months early, primarily he just needed to grow, which was difficult at first. He was very small. He was about 4 pounds, and he had a difficult time putting the whole suck, swallow, and breathe trifecta. Like, he could do 2 out of the 3. He could always do 2 out of the 3, but trying to do 3 out of the 3 was tricky for him. And he was pretty healthy for someone 2 months premature and having a diagnosis, a rare genetic diagnosis. So we were very fortunate on his health, so that once he did finally figure out how to eat on his own, they said, great, you're ready to go. And then that's when the journey really began.
So I'm trying to put myself back in your shoes at that time, shortly after the time of the diagnosis. You get this sort of out of the blue diagnosis about Williams syndrome. All of a sudden you have to learn everything you can about Williams syndrome. And I'm wondering, what were the fears that you and Jennifer had as parents with a infant, not even, to his birth date, right? The scheduled birth date.
Right.
And you got this diagnosis. What was going on in your minds?
Yeah, it was a lot of fear. It was a lot of anger at first. We had a very negative diagnosis experience. The genetic counselor who gave us the information did not do a very good job. Kept talking about future children, how this won't affect other future children. To which we finally had to stop. I had to stop her and say, "Can we stop talking about other kids that don't exist? Can we talk about our son?" We had fears of, what is this going to be? What is Williams syndrome? Is he going to have surgery after surgery after surgery? When is his heart going to have problems? When are his kidneys going to have issues? So there were all those fears. I gotta say, though, kind of selfishly, as a dad, getting that diagnosis was one of the best things that ever happened to me personally as a dad. Because up until my son's birth, I was freaking out about, should we be already talking to preschools? Will he be an athlete? Will he love music? Will he want to be an actor? And how do I prevent that? And I was just caught up in all of that excess stuff, that rabbit hole that's so easy to go down, that when we got the diagnosis, it really refocused me and allowed me to really meet my son where he was and go, this is my kid, and I am going to be here with him right now. And it really helped me stay, especially in that, let's just say that first year or so, really helped me stay focused on the now and how do we just help him be him. And that is something that I've really tried to continue to do is always just trying to remind myself to meet him where he's at and to just help him be the best version of him that he can be, and not some sort of weird preconceived notion of what I thought he might be. So it was the whack upside the head that I needed as a dad, and I try to remember that my son's, from an individual standpoint, my son's diagnosis was maybe the wake up call that I needed to be the kind of dad that I want to be, and that I kind of hoped I would be, at least trying to stay on that path.
Yeah, well, if I can paraphrase what you've said, it's very unusual, I think, at least that early on in your experience, to come to the conclusion that this is the best thing that's happened to me as a dad. I've had other dads say, I wouldn't have asked for a child with special needs, but knowing everything I know now, I wouldn't change anything at all, which is a little bit different because that's more of like a retrospective experience. But I'm wondering, was there some meaningful advice that you got early on that helped, put you on that path?
Not really not anything specific. In fact, if anything, it was some sort of kind of the opposite of advice. Hearing other people talk about saying they're sorry for, our kid has a diagnosis, and having people go, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that." I was like, well, there's nothing to be sorry about. He's still our kid. So things like that, and hearing other people talk about, oh, you're so, like you're so brave, or, oh, you're not going to get anything you can't handle. And, and it was like, none of that is actually real. And it's all of that talk that, again, sort of helped me go, you know what, I'm just going to be here with my kid. And I'm going to, I know he needs to strengthen his neck so he can hold his head up. Well, I'm going to work on that with him. We did have some really wonderful early childhood teachers that would come out to our house to help. And sort of finding that balance of being with your kid now, enjoying your child now, but also we do need to do some stuff. We do need to do some stuff to help him going forward here. If we want him to be able to crawl, we want him to be able to hold his head up and stand up and stuff like that. There is stuff that we need to do that is extra than that other kids might not have to. You wouldn't necessarily have to be so deliberate about.
We'll be back with more of the conversation on the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast in just a few moments. But first, this quick message. Please help 21st century dads gather research on families raising children with special needs by having them complete the Special Fathers Network Early Intervention Parents Survey. A link to the survey can be found in the show notes. As a token of our appreciation, each person, mom or dad, who completes the survey will receive a Great Dad coin. Thank you. Now, back to the conversation.
I'm wondering, at the risk of focusing on the negative, what have been some of the biggest challenges that you encountered?
It's been hard for him to make friends. Luckily, he's got two cousins around the same age that they love each other very much, and so we're able to have some outlet for that. His physical challenges, there's no real going out and throwing the ball around. I mean, we will try to do that, but that is a challenge, and that also doesn't really interest him. He doesn't have the same interests that I do. He could care less about soccer. I once asked him if he wanted to try to be in a show once, and he said, "Oh, would I have to sing with other people?" We're like, "Yeah," and he goes, "Oh yeah, then no." And I'm like, "Well, you love singing." He goes, "Yeah, I just like singing me. I just want, I want everybody to pay attention to me." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." So, just trying to support his interests, support the things that he gets into, even when they're things that I have had no experience with. We've also been really lucky with his educational teams. So there have been educational struggles and some physical challenges that have been really difficult, but we've always found a way. We've always worked, I think, in a very collaborative way with the people we need to work with to help him.
Yeah, well, it does really sound like you've made the most of the situation, and the challenges that you've described, with all due respect, sound like the challenges that many people would have with, a preteen, right?
Yeah.
Trying to find out, who they are, and, the world revolves around them. And you mentioned that when you were growing up, you probably thought the same way, right?
Yeah, very much so.
And your dad had the patience, to stick with you and be present. And it looks like the baton has been handed down, and you're successfully, carrying that and maybe the torch as a present and involved dad. So I think it's just fabulous.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, we have been incredibly lucky with his health. We haven't had a lot of the health issues that other families with Williams syndrome have had. He hasn't been in and out of hospitals a bunch, and so we recognize how fortunate we have been with his health, which has allowed us to have these other sort of quote unquote regular parent issues.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. So I'm thinking about supporting organizations, and I'm wondering what organizations come to mind that you've relied on for Ben's benefit or your family's benefit.
Yeah, early on after we got the diagnosis, after meeting some other families with Williams syndrome through the Williams Syndrome Association, I recognized, okay, these are people that I'm going to want to have a relationship with going forward, whether it's, helping find resources for education or medical resources or just that sense of community. The WSA has been great. And other than that, we've mostly been able to rely on his public school. Some really wonderful teachers. Once the pandemic hit and all the acting work went away, that's when I really started leaning into getting more into active advocacy. And I joined the board of directors for an organization called Partnership Resources, which is an adult service center, adult program center for adults with developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities, helping them with everything from outlet for artistic expression to job training to helping adults be adults and live as independently as they can or as they choose. And that was, I got involved with them because sort of to hedge my bets, because I wanted to make sure something like that existed when my son got older. That was really the first really like big forward thinking thing that I allowed myself to do, was to say, okay, I want to start working with some people and learning about what it's like to be an adult with disabilities so that I can be ready when my son becomes an adult and maybe have some things in place. Then I started working with Family Voices of Minnesota, which they're part of the Family Voices USA and the Parent to Parent Network, Parent to Parent USA Network. I got involved with them through another parent friend, and I originally was just going to edit their virtual fundraiser during the pandemic. Just kind of fell in love with the idea of parents talking to other parents, people helping each other based on their own experiences, and tending to that emotional aspect that you don't get from just looking things up on Google, or often you don't get from talking to medical professionals. We have to tend to our soul a little bit, and that emotional component. And I really feel like that's where parents are a huge benefit to each other, being able to say, I get it. It sucks. I was there too, or I am still there, but maybe in a slightly different spot. So you're not alone. And so I started working with them, and that has been the next big shift in my life, is really prioritizing that.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. It's clear to me that your advocacy is not only making an impact in the community, but I suspect that it's been somewhat therapeutic for you and your family as well. So in addition to Williams Syndrome Association, Partnership Resources, and the Parent to Parent organization, you took the initiative to start something called the Dad Joke Group. And I'm wondering, what was the backstory on that, and who's involved?
Yeah, well, so that, when I joined Family Voices of Minnesota, I still am the only dad, because all of us that work for Family Voices of Minnesota are all parents of kids with disabilities and complex medical needs. But I was the only dad. And dad jokes are so fun and dumb, and they're a great way to just sort of break the ice on a Monday morning when we're having a Zoom meeting and stuff. And so these dumb dad jokes just sort of became a thing that I would just kind of throw out in meetings and when I'm talking with my colleagues. And so when my boss and I, when we were talking about what are next steps, and I said, I think it's time that we try and see if we can get a dad's group going. She's like, great, run with it, do whatever you need to do. She kind of gave me free rein. And like we have talked about, and I know you've talked about with other dads and other men, it's hard to get men excited about a support group, calling something a support group. So I'm like, I don't want to call it a support group. What can I be calling it? And so for some reason, I even think, honestly, it's so silly, but I think even like Jimi Hendrix might have been like popped up on the playlist or something. And I'm like, oh yeah, the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Maybe I should call it the Dad Joke Experience. And I kind of thought about it, and I'm like, yeah, you know what? This is kind of sticking with me, the Dad Joke Experience, because things get so heavy that sometimes you just gotta laugh a little bit. And I said, well, I don't know, let's try it. And for better or for worse, it's stuck. And so I started the Dads group back in January of 2022, and it was pretty slow going over the summer months here, but we have a core group of guys that come back every month, and we all, we're all starting to get really familiar with each other's stories so that we're comfortable enough with each other to sometimes ask hard questions and sometimes ask awkward questions and be able to talk to each other about it. to have a group of guys that are willing to talk about some of the things that are unique to dads, especially dads of kids with, with special needs, especially other dads don't get it. And and that's fine that they don't get it, but it does mean that you get really lonely sometimes. And to just have whether just once a month.
Yeah, well, I love what you're doing.
Yeah.
Is it a virtual experience or a face-to-face experience?
Yeah, I mean, right now, because, we still, since we started back in January of 2020, it's been virtual. Most of us live in and around the metro area, so I do see maybe at some point we are able to maybe try to do an in-person meetup, but I don't think we'll ever take the virtual component away, because that way we are able to be spread out all over the state. I have a couple guys that come pretty regularly that are located up in the lakes area of northern Minnesota, and it's really wonderful. It's really great to get a slightly different geographic input, because they're raising kids with special needs in maybe in a little bit more rural of an area.
Yeah, talk about being isolated, right? You're near a big city,
right.
Lots of resources for you as a parent, for your children, for that matter. But if you're in, a remote area, right, where the nearest town might be, 30 minutes away or 40 minutes away, the possibility or probability of being isolated is much higher.
Yeah, I'm in constant, in awe of these guys, and I'm in awe of anybody that is willing to go, I don't know, and I need a little help. Our society doesn't place value on asking for help. We're all just expected to know things. So that act of bravery of saying, I'm lost here, guys. I need a little help. I always try to make sure I honor that. It's a great, great thing. Just knowing that somebody has your back a little bit because they get it just makes you walk a little taller.
Yeah, well, I love your heart for working with other dads. And it's pretty basic. We're the gender that doesn't pull over and ask for directions when we're lost, right? So what I hear you saying is, anybody who's willing to say, hey, I'm lost, right? I could use some direction. It's a logical thing, but like you said, society doesn't celebrate that, right? What we're talking about is showing vulnerability, right? And most of us Neanderthals think that vulnerability is a weakness, and then when you really peel back the onion a little bit, you realize that that's actually a strength, right? To be able to say, hey, I'm not where I want to be, and I want to do something about it. And if I stay in the cave, I'm not likely to find the solutions on my own. So opening yourself up to be in the presence of other individuals, and we're talking about dads in this situation, is a wonderful thing, right? And you're going to form these relationships, maybe lifelong relationships, as a result of, making the extra effort, being there, supporting one another. So thank you for taking the lead on that. So I'm thinking about advice, and I'm wondering if there's any advice that you can offer a parent, father in particular, who maybe is close to the beginning of his journey, after getting a diagnosis. What would you suggest?
Yeah, I mean, the piece of advice that I would give, I think, kind of piggybacks on what you were just talking about. As an actor, I've trained for years and years and have worked with some wonderful teachers. And one of the things we're always trying to strive for is having that vulnerability and being vulnerable on stage or in front of the camera, and all of that the word vulnerability means. When you allow yourself to be vulnerable, you invariably will allow yourself to be honest. And so I guess a piece of advice I would say is get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Get comfortable with being vulnerable, because that's when you will find the honesty. And to bring it all the way back to what I said at the beginning of this interview, when you allow yourself to be vulnerable and that honesty comes through, that's when you can meet your kid where they are. And I sort of feel like that might be a good encapsulation of sort of how I am trying to approach, not always successfully, but how I'm trying to approach things.
I love it. Thank you for sharing. So I'm sort of curious to know, why have you agreed to be a Special Fathers Network mentor father?
Because I believe in it. I believe in what dads can do. I believe that dads are important, that we can have this exciting, dynamic relationship with our kids, regardless of what their abilities are. I mean, I love being a dad. It's the greatest thing. I love being a dad, and I want to see if I can help other dads. I know that it's hard being a dad of kids with special needs, and if I can help another dad, even just for a little bit, go, yeah, you know what, this is pretty great. It's absolutely worth it. It's worth the extra hours. It's worth the time. It's worth sitting in front of a computer screen, over Zoom.
Yeah, well, thank you for being part of the network. We're very grateful for your involvement. I'm wondering if there's anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up.
I knew this question was coming, and I don't really, I guess I'll just reiterate once again that it's okay when things aren't going well. You're not alone. You are having an experience that so many of us have had, that type of experience, but your experience is still unique unto you. Tend to your emotions too. Don't feel like everything has to be facts, figures, talking to doctors, talking to, reading articles. Tend to your soul. Listen to a sad song, watch a good movie. Heal your soul up a little bit. Talk to another dad.
Great advice. Thank you. So let's give a special shout out to Corey Ferguson for helping connect us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Corey.
If somebody wants to learn more about Williams syndrome, partnership resources, parent to parent, or to contact you, what's the best way to do that?
The best way to contact me is through my website at www.joelliestman, JoelLiestman.com. There you can find links to the organizations that I work with, and my theater stuff too is there. My acting stuff is there, but I also have all my advocacy stuff there. Or just Google Family Voices of Minnesota, and we'll get you hooked up with some awesome people.
We'll be sure to include all that in the show notes, so it'll make it as easy as possible for somebody to follow up. Joel, thank you for taking the time and many insights. As a reminder, Joel is just one of the dads who's part of the Special Fathers Network, a mentoring program for fathers raising a child with special needs. If you'd like to be a mentor father or are seeking advice from a mentor father with a similar situation to your own, please go to 21stcenturydads.org. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. As you probably know, the 21st Century Dads Foundation is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization, which means we need your help to keep our content free to all concerned. Would you please consider making a tax-deductible contribution? I would really appreciate your support. Joel, thanks again.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening to the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children match up with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for dads to support other dads. To find out more, go to 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we would be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad. Lastly, we're always looking to share interesting stories. If you'd like to share your story or know of a compelling story, please send an email to david@21stcenturydads.org.
The Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast was produced by me, Tom Couch. Thanks again to Horizon Therapeutics, who believe that science and compassion must work together to transform lives. That's why they work tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics at horizontherapeutics.com.